discussion, fair, etc. And Michael does actually get to start it off. So why is this that you raised your hand? Raised your hand.
I really wanted to see how we looked at the cosmological argument.
Okay.
And I'd say that one because it's more simple. We've seen it before, but it's a fairly simple deductive argument. Premise one, premise two, conclusion. You can't argue the logic of the actual deduction, but we can nitpick the premises.
Yep.
So I thought that it's probably a more clear argument, I think, and it brings us into just the philosophical realm.
Okay. What were the premises?
All things that begin to exist have a cause. Correct me if I'm wrong here, right?
There are a few forms. I'll write a couple of them here. That's one of them. That would be the broadest that I've heard. The narrowest is probably this one. We'll call it 1 prime. If the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause.
Isn't that sort of like this conclusion?
Nope.
Okay. Just checking.
Well, I'll back up. It's like the conclusion, but it is not the conclusion. Okay.
It almost feels like you need a word to define in the definition.
Well, where's the definition in the word? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, like, when you define a word, you don't want to use the word in the definition, and if you use something that sounds like a conclusion in the premise, it just seems. I like the first one.
So the reason the reason the second formulation is better it's easier to tell whether you've carried the burden logically. Is it's an if-then statement. If A is true, then B is true. And then your next premise, you say A is true, and now you can say logically, deductively, therefore B is true. So it has that advantage.
Maybe I like the first one because it involves a little more sneaking up on somebody.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't like that. I like it.
Yeah, I don't. It is not in the business of most logicians. There are no points given on academic papers for level of sneakiness from the abstract to the conclusion, right? That's usually considered a bad thing. Like you're not supposed to sneak up on them with it. You're supposed to say in the abstract. Okay. Then what's the second premise?
The universe began to exist.
Okay.
Or had a beginning.
Yes. Right. Exist. And then 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Okay. Next question. There's the argument. All right. So the first, when we write an argument, we want to make sure of a few things. If you're writing the argument down, what you want to make sure is first look at your argument and see if it proves what you think that it proves. Okay. Like I think this is a good argument for fill in the blank. Does this actually show that that's the case? And broadly speaking, there are two kinds of arguments, deductive and inductive. A deductive argument is one that if the premises are true, then necessarily the conclusion is true. Like you don't get a choice. If the premises are true, it absolutely results in the conclusion to within the same degree of certainty that you have of the premises in terms of certainty of the argument. So there's a difference, by the way, between truth value of an argument and your certainty of its truth value. Something can be absolutely true and you can be uncertain of that being the case. But in this case, what we're talking about is the validity of the logic. Is the logic valid? So in this case, the universe began to exist, that would be A, and then the universe has a cause would be B. So there's logician, or they often use P and Q, and nobody seems to know why they use P and Q. But if P, then Q. And then 2 says basically P, or in this case A. and that means therefore B. So if A, then B, A, therefore B. And when they say A or B, they mean A is true or B is true. So if A is true, then B is true. A is true, therefore B is true. That's what this argument says. So logically, this is a valid logical form. There are a few of them that are recognized. Some of them are considered more certainly true than others from a logical validity perspective, but this is kind of one of the most ancient and accepted logical forms. So it's a very straightforward deductive argument. So if that's the case that this is a valid argument, then the next question is, are the premises true? Yeah. So, and yes, okay. So if you've all gone right through to like, nope, argument's good. Let's figure out what it was. Yes. Are the premises true? And so in order for a deductive argument to work, you need premises that are more plausibly true than their negation. And that's for the argument to kind of go through it all. The more certain you are of the premises, the more certain you would be that the conclusion is true by reason of the truth of the premises. So not by the logical validity. The logical validity here is as certain as 1 + 1 = 2. As certain as you are of that, you can be as certain of this, that the argument is logically valid. But it can be valid and false. So I can say something like this. If Scott has a fur coat, then Scott is a wolf. Scott has a fur coat, therefore Scott is a wolf. That's a valid logical form, but the premises are false. Specifically, if he has a fur coat, then he's a wolf. That premise is kind of obviously false. So that is a valid argument, but one that is conclusion is false because one of the premises is false. So it's very important to determine whether you have true premises. Back to Michael.
Yeah, we can examine the premises, and I think that's worth doing. I also believe that there's some room to be gained by examining what does this imply, what does the universe entail, and what does that necessarily mean about the existence of a cause outside of the universe.
Yes. So there would be, I think Michael is making the point and like you wanted to go to the next point, the question is, okay, well, if we buy this and we buy this, if we think those are more plausibly true than false, then necessarily we've bought this, we buy these two in whatever form, and we buy this, then we've bought this. What does that imply? And it depends on how you define universe. So maybe we better define universe, because the definition of, if you haven't watched a collegiate debate before, where a lot of the kind of debate world interacts, those debates are, the bulk of them are not giving the argument. The bulk of them are arguing for the truth of the premises, and the bulk of arguing for the truth of the premises is arguing about what the definitions actually are. So the success or failure of almost all these arguments lie in the definition. So words that we have to define, obviously universe, existence, cause. Once you have those three concepts down, the rest of it should follow. So knowing that we want to define three things here, so we might as well do it. What's the definition of one, universe? What's the definition of exist? And what's the definition of cause? Who wants to take a stab? And begin, yeah. Exist and I'll put in here because I think it's in there, began to exist. Okay. Good. What else? You want to start here? Do you want to propose?
The universe, everything that we observe and possibly more.
Nothing like getting squishy from the beginning just to make it tough. Yeah.
We don't want to limit the definition, because then if we find more, then our previous definition of the universe was wrong.
Okay. We want a definition that'll satisfy. Let's say we often hear cosmologists or physicists talk about, we see the observable universe, which implies that there might be unobservable parts of the universe. So is that something new and different, or is that just more universe? And your point is, let's define it in such a way that it's just more universe. Okay. So what does that mean the universe is? What is it? What is it that we're talking about observing? What is it we're talking about?
Time, space, and matter.
Okay, yeah, we can say maybe time, space. I'll ask your permission. Matter, and what did Einstein tell us is the same thing as matter, or at least is interchangeable? Energy. Okay, so you've got time, space, matter, and energy. Anything else we would add to this?
Oh, God.
Well, I mean, there's some good candidates. So do we add? Is the universe? Does it include ideas? Justice,
Right.
mathematics,
Entropy.
Are those part? Is that part of the universe? Do those begin to exist, or are those something different? So are these concrete objects? Are they abstract objects? What are they? We have a hexagon now. I don't know what that's about. Sorry, I missed it, Mark. Say again.
With me?
Yep, I
It's
missed it.
just hard to call time concrete, but.
Yes. I'm gonna go on a rant on time if we get a pause more than 10 seconds.
No, not that one.
Yep.
It's also possible that these same things could exist in another universe. So I wouldn't want to exclude the existence of time, space, matter, and energy in a different universe.
Right. So the question is, can we have a definition that includes all universe, literally uni, and kind of verse, meaning of one thing, one word you can use to refer to all that is. I think we can divide them into, at a minimum, physical universe, and if there are any immaterial objects, immaterial universe. So like Plato and company thought there were world of perfect forms. They could be abstract objects like mathematical objects, those kinds of things. Some people think those are mind dependent. Some things they exist as Platonic objects in some idealized world somewhere. But the question is, like, maybe we could say universes that can have causal relationships.
I'm more getting to the angle of the difference between a universe and a multiverse.
Right. So do we want
so a universe can exist within a multiverse?
Yeah.
There are many universes, some of which may contain those four things.
I think we can put an umbrella over everything. I mean, I kind of like the first statement of the premise that everything that begins to exist.
So if we say this is all time, space, matter, and energy, is that the multiverse, or is that one universe?
I would say that we don't know about other universes, but potentially it's other universes.
Right. So all time, space, unless you can. So the question is, if you want it to be all universes, all conceivable universes, then what property do we need to add to time, space, matter, and energy to make sure we don't miss out on one of the universes that's in the multiverse?
I'm not sure that we know enough about the multiverse to say that, but it definitely impacts the argument because
What is
the universe could be caused by the multiverse.
What is the multiverse?
We don't know anything about
The multiverse.
It's just an abstract, it's just an idea.
I think cosmologists know something about it based on mathematics. I don't really understand that mathematics, but really smart people know something about these things that I don't.
Well, some people who are not really smart understand something about it because I understand something about it. But
I don't understand that much about it. I understand the concept of it. I don't understand the mathematics. But it's not correct to say we don't know anything about it.
Right.
Cosmologists, mathematicians know.
right, we haven't
have
observed.
equations.
It depends on whether. So there's some fuzziness in the way cosmologists and physicists talk about it, and this is one of the main reasons why. In the early 20th century, and the late 19th century, there was a concept out there called logical positivism or observationalism, where philosophers / physicists were saying, hey, if you can't observe it, then it is meaningless. And if it's meaningless, then they went a step further and said, if it's meaningless or if you can't observe it, therefore it does not exist. Now, later, philosophers were like, that's not how that works. And logicians were like, that's not how that works. So positivism is one of the few philosophical views that actually got killed, so to speak. Like people who are philosophers there are no logical positivists anymore. That has been shown to be logically contradictory. But it caused some confusion because in the days of like early quantum mechanics, it was like, well, if it's not observed, and this is where Schrodinger did his famous, cat thought experiment. Schrodinger's point was not to point out this is how quantum mechanics works. Schrodinger was pointing out this can't possibly be right. That was his point. Other people took the ball, just took the bit in the teeth and ran with it and were like, nope, that's the way that it is. And they still teach Copenhagen interpretation occasionally in schools at the lower levels, but it's really, really rare to find a modern physicist that actually thinks the Copenhagen interpretation is correct. So at the end of the day, the belief that if it wasn't observable, therefore it isn't true, died. But it's responsible for a lot of the language that we have that we talk about it, to your Wittgensteinian point, where language can create a lot of difficulties. And so loaded in there are things like nothing, where the philosopher by nothing means not anything, and the logician by nothing means not anything. And sometimes physicists will say nothing and they mean an extremely energetically loaded quantum field. And you're like, that's not the same thing as nothing. And so the definition of terms here is going to be very, very important. The multiverse was how it came to be. We'll leave that off for now. But the multiverse is the idea that time, space, matter, and energy are the fundamental things, and they're governed by, as far as we know, 4 forces that can be unified at different times and under different regimes. And those forces are the electric force, the electromagnetic force, the weak force, the strong force. These are both nuclear forces, and gravity. And we have a theory that unifies the first 3 called the Standard Model of particle physics, and we have Einstein's general relativity and a couple others like Mond that are representations of gravity as we understand them. We also don't think that those are unifiable, so we don't think that these will ever fit together. So we know one or both of them are wrong or partially wrong, and the great hope had been for a unified theory for years, and then they realized they couldn't unify it, so there's hopes for a new physics. All that to basically say, when physicists and cosmologists talk about the multiverse, they are talking about time, space, matter, and energy. Specifically, you'll see stuff talked about inflationary universes as well, and a lot of kind of where multiverse theory comes from now. It's at least expressed in terms of how inflationary universes might do this. You'll hear things about brain universes, but that's B-R-A-N-E universes, not B-R-A-I-N universes. All of these, though, are configurations of time, space, matter, and energy, usually modeled under particular gravitational regimes, almost always using general relativity or an approximation of it, in order to say, here's how other things like we see our observable universes, how other observable universes to other people might possibly exist. Now, we have no evidence of any of these, but one of the reasons, the motivations behind it was people started to realize that the teleological argument, so to speak, not necessarily, maybe from a Christian or theist perspective, but sorry for the long tirade, I'll come back to you soon. The theist perspective, or at least the design crew's argument that said this universe, based on everything that we know about it, is excruciatingly fine-tuned to be the size and complexity that it is, and that is so improbable that you kind of choke on the numbers. And so one of the possibilities is, well, you may just be seeing anthropomorphically one of the few universes that actually contains human life. All those other universes are in fact out there. So you're not drawing a royal straight flush from one 52-card deck a billion times in a row. There are quadrillions and quadrillions and quintillions and so on decks out there, and you're just looking at the lucky draw of one of those decks. So all the rest of those universes are out there. In the multiverse, we're only seeing it this way. And so, like, string theory posited something like 10 to the 500th of them, and then they end up having to reduce that number because they realized a bunch of those couldn't mathematically exist, and so on and so forth. But that's generally the way things came forward here and then here.
I was just going to connect the universe with this fine-tuning argument, but you didn't do it.
Sorry, I tiraded over your point. I apologize.
I think we can. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just think it's incorrect what you just said about the origination of these theories. I think that they originated because they were entailed by mathematics of inflationary theory and other theories in cosmology that happened before they were applied to teleological arguments. And we do know something about them because they are entailed by mathematics in various models of the universe.
Which model entails multiverse?
I
think the Guth inflationary model entails it, or is at least consistent with it, and there are others as well. I'm not claiming to know many details about it, but I know that I've heard cosmologists talk about how this idea originated, and it was because of mathematical intelligence of various models. Now, those models aren't proven models necessarily, and we don't know which model of the early universe is correct, so it doesn't mean that these things exist, but if you start with this model, then it entails the existence of multiverses.
So if such a model as that exists, I'm unaware of it, and that's not the way that historically it progressed. So historically, we have until recently, I say recently, till in earnest the last 20 to 30 years, we have really only looked at saying this universe is
Right,
all that
fairly
exists
recent,
from
but it didn't happen
time
because they were
space.
worried about
matter.
philosophers and the teleological argument. Cosmologists really don't pay a lot of attention to that kind of thing. It happened because of the mathematics led them to that. And then philosophers, or people that were interested in questions of God, said, oh, look, there's this multiverse hypothesis that could explain these teleological problems.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you and say that's not the history of the science in that case.
It's the history that I've read.
If you could forward me where you read that, that would be great, because that's just not correct.
It is correct.
I'll run through the history, and you can tell me where I go wrong. Since you read the history, you'll know.
Well,
So,
it's been a
in
while since
Einstein's
I've read
time, the assumption was that the universe was the galaxy. Like, we thought the universe was 100,000 light years apart. And at the time, people were not working on multiverse theory. They didn't turn around and say, hey, here's one of a bunch of universes. They're saying, we're looking for an explanation of our universe.
They didn't have inflation theory and things like that.
Right, so Friedman solves the Einstein equations for a certain class of the way the universe could be. And as a result, we end up with another fine-tuning problem, which is we seem to have a universe that was bounced on a knife edge. And then we eventually come to the belief that the universe is expanding based on the kind of redshift we see in every direction. And then eventually, as we're researching deeper and deeper and deeper as we get better and better at optics, we come up with a observation based on what was initially thought to be pigeon droppings, but turns out to be the cosmic microwave background. And that kind of revolutionized a lot of the way that we looked at the universe. And then as a result of looking at the universe, realizing that, hey, this is all the same 2.7 degree Kelvin return that we get looking in every direction, cosmologists and physicists realized something very important, which was these are regions of space that at one point were not in contact with each other. And so as a result, they shouldn't be that same temperature. And this was a really big deal. This was a huge deal. This was a Nobel Prize winning deal. So eventually they're like, we got to put up some better instrumentation, and they put up better instrumentation with the idea of if the universe is this homogeneous, it can't, then none of our models work. Like Big Bang Theory doesn't work, Landum CDM versions of Big Bang Theory don't work, but the main theories will not work. And they won't work because the universe is too smooth and the universe is too homogeneous. And what eventually happened at that point was we put up Kobe and some similar satellites, and we're looking for smaller temperature differences. And they found the small temperature differences that they were looking after. And these small temperature differences are supposed to correlate to quantum fluctuations in the very, very early universe that then turned into the larger galaxies, et cetera, that we see. The problem being if the universe is so smooth at the beginning, you don't get matter coalescing. Everything just expands away from each other and stays smooth. You need it to be clumpy in order to get what we have now, which is a very clumpy, stringy universe. So Kobe and company found some of these clumpy regions, so to speak. But then while this is going on, another problem arises, which is even if you can get them clumpy like this, how do you, it won't work. The universe still won't work because it will either, those portions will recollapse into smaller things, or you can't get them stretched out in such a way that they will form the galaxies that we have. So at that time, Alan Guth proposed inflation theory, which from basically the time that the universe is kind of atomic in size, up for fractions of a second, it expanded at more than 1,000 times the speed of light. So It's a mechanism that we don't see in nature. It was an ad hoc proposal. We don't have any. It doesn't come from the math. What you do is say, if the universe has small quantum fluctuations and you want to end up with the universe we see, you have to stretch the universe out at several times, 1,000 times the speed of light in order to get this universe. Otherwise, it simply doesn't work. So it's a completely ad hoc. I mean, don't let anybody tell you differently. It's 100% ad hoc, made up thing. When I say made up, I mean like we observed nothing in nature that looks like this. All we did was make it up and say, will that fix the problem? And the answer is, yeah, it'll fix the problem. Now the question is, okay, well, we made it up. Is it there? So making it up is a hypothesis. Do we see anything that shows that inflation theory might actually be the case? So we're always looking for kind of these echoes of the inflationary phase of the universe. And as of right now, we don't have any evidence for it, but it is the ad hoc explanation that would at least connect our theories of the very early universe to the universe that we see now. So in the course of doing all of these things, string theory was going on, so to speak. String theory is, if it's not dead yet, but it's seems to be put on life support, and should be. It wasn't a very good theory to start with, but in the course of string theory, there were a number of different ways that matter could itself form. So the base reality of matter in string theory is proposed to be one-dimensional strings that are kind of looped in around themselves, and they vibrate a certain way, and those vibrations give rise to the matter that we see today, and energy, of course, too. And these one-dimensional strings can exist in a number of modes, and those modes each imply kind of a different way the universe would be. So in doing so, there could be kind of what did fall out of the math of string theory was there were 10 to the 500th possible universes based on these modes that strings could interact in and the type of matter that they would form. Now there was eventually, this didn't happen until I think about 10 years ago, maybe 15, people started realizing that there was what they called a swamp, or a series of swamp universes in those 10 to the 500th universes, meaning that the majority of those 10 to the 500th universes, potential universes, couldn't actually exist because they in a mathematical way, basically contradict themselves. They would never get started. They couldn't get off the ground. But there's still a lot of universes, so to speak, left under string theory. But I think most people have rejected string theory. And so the one place where you can say, well, these are the way matter could be configured, that smacks more true of string theory. But from a cosmological perspective, we've always sought to explain the universe that we have. So there have been a number of different types of explanations. Some of them are, this was the very beginning of the universe at the Big Bang singularity. Others were something like Carroll, the kind of famous Sean Carroll and another philosopher, Chen, built the Carroll-Chen model that was like a cyclic universe that goes, compresses down from an earlier universe into a singularity and then bounds back out again. Eventually it was found that universe model doesn't work. So it's a defunct theory. And epicyclic or ekpyrotic models of the universe have been proposed, but all of them have been shown to be mathematically untenable. So as of right now, there are no known models of the universe that work past kind of the singularity. Occasionally you'll see something like this, where they'll say, here's universe A over here, and it's shrinking down in size, and it goes through the singularity, and it comes out kind of in our universe B over here. But in order for this to work, the arrow of entropy, the arrow of time, has to be backwards. You have to go backwards down it. And of course, what a philosopher, a couple of them pointed out was, that's just two universes, one going that way and the other one going this way. So as of right now, there are no known, at least to me, successful models of the universe that work mathematically, that let you have, that require more than one universe in order for them to exist. And none of the prior, so to speak, to the Big Bang models have anything that works that survives through a singularity. And one of the things that Guth did to show this was he worked with Arvin Vord, Alexander Vilenkin, and I forget who I think those two. to show that basically if you go as simply as you possibly can, and you run the geodesic, the actual like geometric map of the space of the universe backwards, you can only it only results in one type of universe, which is ours, and this is called the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. That as long as h, which is the Hubble constant, as long as it's positive, then it means the universe is on average expanding, and we live in an on average expanding universe, which means it started in a singularity. That's the point of that theorem. Okay.
So I think we can say,
From what I'm quickly reading, the idea of the multiverse began in ancient Greece. Obviously, they didn't have a lot of evidence for it, but it's an old concept. It kind of made its way into modern scientific discourse in 1895 in debates between Boltzmann and Zermelo. And then in 52, Erwin Schrödinger brought it up to explain divergences in mathematics, and divergences in equations that he was finding where they were all valid but different. He said maybe all of these things exist simultaneously in different universes. I can't find the exact article that I've read before that talks about how the idea grew mathematically, but I'll look into it. And I do know that many cosmologists are currently spending their entire careers doing mathematics about the multiverse. It's not some kind of dead theory.
Yeah,
people aren't interested in.
So maybe as you were reading, you missed some of what I said. I didn't say multiverse was dead theory. I also didn't say multiverse, like what you're talking about earlier. That wasn't what we conceive of modernly as the multiverse. Yeah, so those were parallel, what were considered parallel universes. So as an example, Boltzmann was saying if there were other universes, then they would based on what we know about the laws of physics, they would have come into being in this particular way and would be much, much smaller. And that the complexity of our known universe is so incredibly large that incredibly large complexity is very, very difficult to explain in terms of these very, very small, these very, very precise constants and quantities that we know have to be there. So what Boltzmann was saying was, if these other universes exist, if there are parallel universes out there that exist, most of them would be, you would be far more likely by orders and orders and orders and orders of magnitude to have a single observer brain, they're called Boltzmann brains, fluctuate in existence, make observations for a second or two, and then fluctuate back out of existence. That is incredibly more probable than our universe fluctuating into existence. So he made an anthropomorphic argument that said, because we observe this universe, that's a good argument, and we don't observe those short universes that are basically empty. That's a very strong, very powerful argument to say this must be the only universe because we should be observers in those other universes by a significant weight of probability. The modern multiverse posits a connection between all of these universes, where there's a causal chain between the existence of those universes and the existence of our universe. Not that these popped into existence from like completely different sources, but that all of them are causally connected in some way.
Right. I'm not trying to say that our modern conception is the same as the old one. I'm just demonstrating that this is not a new idea that people came up with just to deal with the teleological argument. This is an older idea that has developed out of cosmological questions. There aren't any, from anything that I read about the history of this science, I have never read about a scientist saying, there's this teleological argument over here, we better come up with something, let's figure it out. No, it all has developed from their own cosmological queries.
So who do you think Boltzmann was talking to when he's saying?
He was talking to this Zellman guy or whoever.
Okay. And so why is Zellman bringing up what he does?
I don't know. I don't know the details of these conversations.
Well, as you look into it, you'll find the details of the conversations do lie between people who say that...
This was in 1895.
Yeah, lie between people who say that the universe that we see is so exquisitely, specifically improbable that it's a much better hypothesis to say that this universe has some sort of design behind it. That's the count. There are only two views on it. In fact, the teleological argument specifically says there are only three possibilities for why the universe is what it is. One is that it's that way necessarily. It can't possibly be any way other than it is. The second is that it's by design, and the third is that it's by chance. So all these discussions that we're talking about on the multiverse itself and the ones that predate it have to do with how likely is it that we see this exquisite amount of apparent design that came to be just by chance, and that's the reason you have multiverse theories. There's literally no evidence that takes you to a multiverse. There's zero evidence for a multiverse, zero. The only reason to even think that there might be a multiverse is to multiply the probabilistic resources so that you have a bunch of universes to pick from that get you this apparently very, very rare and extremely rare universe.
So this is going to get back to the point of the cosmological argument, and we can argue about where the ideas came from.
Yep.
I think it's fair to say that even if there is a multiverse, for which I agree, there is no evidence other than, there's some mathematical theories, but I can have a lot of theory. But that doesn't even matter, because by the universe, we're talking about everything that exists that would include any multiverse.
So let me ask you: by everything that exists, is this good enough? All time, space, matter, and energy, or do you want to add another thing to our list?
So I think we could include any and all metaphysical things that exist.
Well, does God fit in that category?
Sure.
Okay.
Did he begin to exist?
Is the universe God? Is God part of the universe? You see what I'm saying? So most people on the theological side and the philosophical side separate God from the universe, unless you think God and the universe are one. Or the same thing.
Yeah, no, I didn't say that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, to be fair.
To be fair.
But I do think we can, certainly within the multiverse concept, idea, theory, whatever you want to call it,
yeah.
I think we can, as far as the universe goes, we can easily put an umbrella over all of that.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, to me,
it does. That's an argument not worth arguing.
Yeah. So to me, it's obvious. It seems apparent to me that the multiverse is all time, space, matter, and energy.
Sure.
So it could be, and this is possibility, right? So what all possible time, space, matter, and energy would include the universe. Right now, we only have evidence for one universe, but there may be more. So if you want to say that which we observe, then the observable universe. But if you want to say all that may be, we mean all what that may be, all time, space, matter, and energy, and that would include the multiverse as well.
It seems like the way we're defining universe, it sounds like all things that began to exist. Right? So the argument turns into...
It depends on whether you believe time, space, matter, and energy began to exist. So that's a recent thing. Prior to the real advent of the Big Bang Theory, and in fact, the reason it got called Big Bang Theory was derisively by people who think that the universe was eternal. Yeah. So the Big Bang Theory was a derogatory term for this, like, you think this just a Big Bang and all matter and energy came into existence. So there are still on YouTube, go search either like eternal universe theory. There are some fairly old now cosmologists and physicists who are still stumping for and making arguments for that the universe creates matter spontaneously out there. And so they'll have a like NGC maybe 7103, some of these galactic clusters. You can look into them and see these incredibly redshifted spots. And you're like, what, so the Z value of this will be, some higher number, and there'll be a much, much, much lower Z elsewhere in there, or sort of more redshifted, the Z value in there. And most astrophysicists now are like, you're seeing through a hole in the galaxy to one of the more ancient galaxies behind it. And other people were like, no, that's part of the same galaxy. And the idea was this source of this redshift was not necessarily the stretching of space between these galaxies. That some of this was because matter was actually being created, and galaxies were actually being created in other galaxies or near other galaxies. And so they thought that space was literally spitting out, like almost kind of like in the rough concept of a white hole, maybe you might say. We're vomiting matter and energy into existence. That theory has only died in the last 50 years, 50 to 80 years. So that has been going on for a long time. The eternal universe has been the eternal universe versus the beginning universe is what's been argued since ancient times. Which of those two is correct? Has the universe always been there, or has it come into being?
Yeah, so I would be interested to see if this argument can be made with the eternal universe. And
No, there's some, well, it is to you because you think that things that begin to exist naturally have causes. People have also argued that it's possible for things to come into existence uncaused.
Or self-caused, right?
Well, nothing can be self-caused to come into existence because in order to come into existence, it would have to exist. Yeah, that one's it's pretty easy to put to bed, but there are people who will, and again, it comes down to definition. I've never seen an argument where someone said things come into existence uncaused, where they don't actually mean there's some underlying cause to it. So usually it has to do with the definition. All right, I saw another. Oh, yes, sir.
I know in economics they say like anything that can't go on forever won't. I don't know if you could rephrase this. It's like everything that can't logically be past eternal began to exist.
Well, if it's past eternal, then it didn't begin to exist.
Right,
It always existed.
Logically cannot be past eternal began to exist.
I mean, you can do that, but the reason that people formulate it this way is they're trying to make a specific argument without having to carry a larger burden than they need to. So you're making an argument to carry a much heavier burden than the normal practitioner of this argument wants to carry. They don't want to have to prove all kinds of things. They want to show that the universe you see right now began to exist. That's the reason it's scoped down there.
So would you say that the universe doesn't include metaphysical existence?
The physical universe doesn't. So this right here, the universe began to exist, and the universe is time, space, matter, and energy. To me, that's what we would call the physical universe. Some people don't think there's anything other than a physical universe. A metaphysical naturalist would say, are you a metaphysical naturalist?
I'm a Wittgensteinian, so
Okay.
I kind of reject these categories.
Okay, so a metaphysical naturalist would say, yeah, that's all there is. The people in this room, most of them would say, no, I think there's probably an immaterial world. Yeah. This argument would not include that immaterial world because it's not that immaterial world doesn't comprise time, space, matter, and energy.
I could buy that.
I think, getting back to your point earlier, I think it is where this matters, this definition, you said it doesn't really matter. I think it's going to matter when we get to premise 2. Because
the universe,
the strongest
sure.
part for, I think theists have a stronger position in 2 if they keep this to our universe that originated from the Big Bang, because they can point to the Big Bang as time beginning. But if you include a potential multiverse that is outside of the universe that we see, then you can't really prove premise 2. So that's why I think it's a critical.
But you have to say what is made out. What is this multiverse made out of? Because when you say that multiverse is outside of space, matter, and time, you have an idea. What is it made out of?
Well, it probably is made of space, matter, and time, and energy, but it's not within our universe.
So this is
They may have different laws of nature.
So do you have faith that the multiverse is made out of this?
No, I don't have faith in it. I don't necessarily believe that there is a multiverse. I
But
don't
you
know.
have
All I know is that it's a possibility that cosmologists are looking at using mathematics.
So I don't think it's necessary to exclude the multiverse. I think but to your point, certainly you could always throw out that, well, what if it's different somewhere else? But that's kind of like.
So we're on the same page here. When cosmologists are talking about the universe, they are talking about a temporal,
yes, they are
spatial, material universe. They're not talking about something.
Kind of throw out, well, what if it's different somewhere else? Well,
different there might be something like the laws of physics might be different.
Different laws of nature. Right.
Different laws of physics specifically.
Right. Yeah.
So those laws of physics, though, still interact with like the quantum field. The quantum field won't give you something other than time. It needs time and space to run. It'll give you matter and energy, and that's the only thing it'll ever give you is matter, energy, dark energy. That's all it'll ever give you. It's just what that matter looks like. So one of the reasons we see matter the way that we do has to do with the relative values of the strong and the weak force and the electromagnetic force and all that kind of stuff. So you can have slightly different matter, but it was just because the constants in the physics are different.
Right.
As far as we know, I don't know, I've never heard anybody actually propose that the multiverse universes and other universes that are causally outside of our universe, from our perspective, that they are working on different laws of physics. It's the same laws, but different constants and quantities in those laws. That is to say, the law of values, the variables in them, and the constants in them are tuned differently.
And to that matter itself, talking about fine-tuning, to have a universe that is sustainable at all, it has to be
Yeah, so that, I mean, this exceeds most people's interest level, but the collapse of the possibility space of, it's been likened this way. If you can imagine an ocean 1,000 miles deep, wide, so a cube of 1,000 miles, if you took an oil sheen the size of an iPhone and you laid it on the top of it, that's how many universes get past the first stages at all. The vast, vast majority of them, to a mind-numbingly ridiculous degree,
sustainable.
don't even launch, like the complete failure to launch.
So I wanted to go back to one of the theories, just because I've heard it before, which was that either the universe had always existed, or there is some sense of expansion, compression, and what you actually get is the best fit from some sort of linear model of time where the universe kind of comes to existence, comes out, and you're saying, well, it's fine-tuned, but that you're just seeing the time that it's been fine-tuned to kind of fit after it failed 5,000 other times. But instead of having this parallel structure, it's really somehow there's a linear structure of causality or something.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious where that fits.
Well, that's where causality comes into it. So in some way, this is, I don't think this is well understood when people think about this. And even some cosmologists, I think, are not clear on this point. But if you've got some past eternal universe, we can think about it splitting off, and we think of these as different universes. Physicists tend to talk about these kinds of things in terms of light cones. And the reason they do that is one of the assumptions of general relativity is that you can't, it's an assumption, right? We can't prove it either way. We're just assuming it's the case. Is that nothing travels faster than the speed of light. So in order for general relativity and special relativity to be true, that has to be the case. Now, technically, inflation theory violates that assumption, which is one of the problems with inflation theory and general relativity is they don't fit together in some ways, in that there are, the argument is, well, it's okay because matter isn't traveling faster than the speed of light. It's the expansion of the space itself is faster than the speed of light. So that's the counterpoint that the inflationary cosmologist wants to make. But that basically you can talk about causal regions in terms of light cones. And so you can have, in this kind of version of the universe right here, or a multiverse or something like that, you get, light cones coming out of different places. So these are unrelated. Nothing in here can have affected or be affected by anything in here, likewise here. But all three of these came from this region here. Right. So you'll hear of inflationary cosmology, where these different regions are inflating, but they're inflating away from each other. They're like raisins in an inflating muffin. Usually that's how galaxies are described in this universe. But the idea is a little bit similar. It's a little bit of a stretch to say that. But that they all have this causal chain that work their way backwards in this direction. And usually the physicists and cosmologists will say that the arrow of entropy and the arrow of time are either always in the same direction or are the same thing. So that look backwards here, the question is, do these always reduce down to one? Right, so that's the question. Or to Steve's point, is it just one thing? And this is a cyclic model of the universe, where the universe expands and contracts and expands and contracts. So this is we're this universe, or I'll say we're this universe right here in the expansion phase, and that there were two more universes before us, or that this goes on ad infinitum, to some eternal number of universes in the past. And then there are arguments why that can't possibly be the case, et cetera. But that's the question: is it like this, and there are multiple universes that are not causally connected? Are these patches of the same universe right here? And that's why, in some ways, in some viewpoints, the multiverse is just one universe. It's just causally disconnected regions. Our observable universe may be disconnected causally now, in this point in history, from the other parts of the universe, but it's all one universe / multiverse, one thing.
It still has to be causally related to something else.
It's causally related as you go back in the past.
Yes.
It's no longer causally related to each other. Yes.
So we're talking about the beginning.
In that model where it's cyclical, is there something to disprove that, or just say like at some point the inflation reverses?
There's two reasons to not think that this model works. The number one reason is mathematically none of them work. So the same mathematics that say, hey, we should consider looking at this as a possibility, when you run the math, none of them give you the universe. And most of the reason for that is, if I was arguing on their behalf, if I was the the defense, so to speak, on that one, I would argue it's fairly obvious that the math we have is flawed. And so that's a consequence of us not having the right mathematical tools. Maybe such a thing exists, but our mathematical tools are broken, and so they don't work. So where does our math break? It breaks when you have singularities. So singularities, we don't talk about them much until you get to the master's and PhD level of your mathematical physics. But right now, almost all of our physics are rife with what we call singularity problems. So there's a process that goes on in quantum field theory called renormalization, where when you actually run the math on any of these, on how even the basics of quantum theory works, you get these runaway singularities. And so what you have to do is stop them. We say that this is how it works mathematically. You start following the math starts to run away. And when it runs away towards a singularity, you terminate the math and you restart it artificially. And this is called renormalization. Renormalization has been accepted because if you don't do that, you don't get any results out of the theory. Everything blows up, mathematically, literally. So you have to snip these singularities and just pretend they didn't exist. People who are practitioners in the field on Friday nights under influence of a couple of beers will ask the question of like, is this legitimate? Should we be doing this? And I think everybody knows the answer is no, but that may be a consequence of just the math that we're using is flawed. I've made the argument, and here you guys have heard it ad nauseum about where the math is broken on this one. But until we have a better mathematical tool, we just have to admit that we have to fake it until we make it on terms of calculation. So renormalization, anytime you go through a singularity, you have a problem. This is why black holes, that you'll hear popularizers of physics say, our laws of physics break down, or our mathematics break down at the center of a black hole. What they mean is a singularity we can't make any calculations that are meaningful there because we're saying that the radius of that black hole is 0. It's infinitely dense and infinitely small.
Does it require a singularity?
The math requires that it collapses to a singularity. So the question, though, is, so the quantum mechanics folks will say, no, can't have a singularity in quantum mechanics. The classical physics is not quantized, says it's a continuum. You can continue to compress it all the way down to 0. So Einstein's equations are based in Newton, obviously, but they use a series of tensors. And there's nothing that stops a tensor at some point from converging with another part of a tensor. So there's no mathematical reason we know that, and there's no law of physics that we know that would stop the collapse of matter and energy once it starts past that particular radius. So that's why we say they're singularities. Now people will say it can't be the case, it's actually a singularity. Maybe, but there's nothing in math or physics that will stop it that we know based on our understanding, which is why we say our knowledge breaks down. I think it's people admitting it seems like we see black holes out there, things that ought to be black holes. And we don't really believe that they're infinitely dense. So something else must be going on that we don't know, but we don't know what it is. If I had to say it colloquially, that's what I'm saying.
You said math. and then there's another reason. What was the other reason for not believing in that causal chain?
Philosophically, this is very easy to get rid of, which is to say, if the chain is infinite in the past, you would not be at this point. Well, entropy, yeah, but not that. There's literally an infinite number of universes to have crossed, and you can never, in any period of time, cross an infinite number of universes. So you never get to this point. So the fact that we're here and existing here means that there can't be an infinite progression.
Doesn't help to put us earlier because we're still on
You end up with logical contradictions.
Right.
Well, then that goes into the definition of infinite. Is that what we're challenging?
Yes, well, do y'all want me to challenge infinite in here? Do you really want to hear that again? There's no word infinite in here.
So we're still trying to define number one, and we got to get to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with this. Universe is all time, space, matter, and energy. I'm just trying. We're having a discussion to make sure everybody's happy with it.
And that we're saying that includes
I think it's all is all.
all matter, whether that's in this
observable from us or not.
Yeah.
Observed or not observed.
Yeah, and I think really, if you think about it this way, like remember how I was saying, it's all causally connected somewhere. There's a connection somewhere. However, how that connection was, maybe we don't know. But think about it this way: if there are other universes out there that are not at all, even in the past, causally connected to ours, what are we even talking about? Like, we're completely making that up, and there's no way we can even possibly have evidence of that. So there's no connection whatsoever between these putative universes that have never ever been causally connected to our own, but we're just going to make them up and pretend that they're there. Like, that's truly whole cloth. We'll never know. We might as well posit those all day long. And then that's where the more serious-minded people are like, great, fine, yes, maybe there's universes of butterflies out there that we'll never ever touch again. We're talking about stuff that, like, I'm trying to explain the world around us. How do we do that? And anything that's never been causally connected with the world around us can't possibly be an explanation of the world around us, by definition. Okay, so if we're happy with that, going once, going twice. The second definition is, what does it mean to exist, or, as you pointed out, begin to exist? Well, we kind of have to do, let's say we do both of those. This is the tough one. And we have 12 minutes to do it. It should go without saying that this is a multi-class topic. And, and has been already. Perhaps infinitely in the past. All right, so what does it mean to exist?
To have time, space, matter, energy.
Okay, maybe. But then the metaphysician says, the methodological, the metaphysical naturalist is happy with that. But the metaphysician that thinks that there might be mind-dependent objects is not happy with that.
Well,
because they'll say the idea of justice.
To have some property, whether it's known or unknown.
So would you call this just ontology? Or is that something slightly different?
You could, I think it is a question of, like, is that identical to ontology, existence?
Yeah, it's the, what
to me, ontology is the study of that which exists, and maybe particularly the modes in which it
what
existence.
What is to be, or what is, yeah. Okay.
It's a study of it, yeah.
Sure. So we can summarize that in 10 minutes.
Yeah, right.
If we're talking about the beginning of the universe as time, space, matter, and energy, can we just apply existence as it relates to those things and leave out the bigger metaphysical questions for the purposes of this argument?
I think so, and the only quibble I might make with that is, like, if you're going to, I think the answer is yes, in short. You know, if you have a definition of dogs, these are canine animals, canines of some sort, and you're like, but I only want to talk about huskies. At some point, what a husky is comes up, and you're like, well, it's a dog that, and then you list the additional properties that it has in addition to being a dog. So if we end up in some we may end up in a place as we talk about existence where we're like, well, what is it that's common to all existence? Because we're talking about some special case, and is this special pleading, or is this really just a subset of existence? So hopefully we can get away with the scoped version of it, but we may end up drug into what existence is.
So I was just thinking, so in something, you have to have a thing, so that it manifests properties.
Yeah.
I'm starting somewhere.
All right, so I will condense my 10-minute time rant down to a 2-minute time rant, and I'll go with this one at a minimum. So, you know me, you know that I think time and change are the same thing. I think change is the more fundamental. Let's skip that for a second and say that doesn't matter. At a minimum, philosophers appear to be willing to make this statement without much fear of contradiction, that time entails change and change entails time, that you can't have one without the other. You don't get change. Change can't, if time will not advance, or let's say that if change occurs, then time must have advanced, if such a thing as time exists. Or if time moves forward, one of the questions has always been, does that mean that something has to change? Or can the whole universe freeze, the whole multiverse, everything that exists, freeze for 1 million years and then restart? No changes occurred. Did 1 million years actually pass? Or did we just say 1 million years passed? In reality, that's just what happens one instant to another. Like, for all we know, between my last sentence and my current sentence, all time froze and 1 million years passed and here we are again. We wouldn't know the difference. So I think rather than posit something extravagant like that, we just say if change happens, if change happens, then time is happening. So time and change are very closely related. The thought experiment I use for this one is imagine that you have built two machines, a motion freezing machine and a time freezing machine. And you go down to the local Starbucks and you put it up against the window and you throw the switch on the time freezing machine and you make your observations, and as you switch it off, you switch the motion freezing machine on at the same instant, and then you make your observations, and then you get back and you start it back up. You get back to the lab and you're like, oh, and you realize you may have misprinted the labels on which machine was which, and you don't know the difference. From your observations or from the way the machine operated, can you tell which one froze time and which one froze change? At the end of the day, you can't. And Leibniz's law would then suggest that they're the same thing, at least as that thought experiment goes. And then I would point you back to the kind of the canonical version of this one is called Sidney Shoemaker wrote an argument where he divides the universe into 3 sectors, A, B, and C. And sector A freezes every 3 years, B every 4 years, and C every 5 years, I think, or 6 years. I forget how it works out on this one. But basically, this sector will freeze, the other two will roll. And so at the end of that year of freezing, it looks like the other two universes have jumped forward a year, basically. And so that happens, and in the 50th or 60th year, all 3 of them freeze for a year. So nobody sees anybody jump or not jump for a year or freeze for a year. So the question is, does that mean that a year actually passed or not? And if you think of it in terms of the thought experiment I gave you, what would actually happen every 60 years is nobody freezes because there's no change anywhere. The only way to make there be change is for you to stand outside the universe with your own special clock and say, well, it went for a year. Well, where's that guy? Who's that guy, right? If God's out there, then yeah, you can do that. But absent God being out there, who's the Laplace's demon or something like that? Who's keeping the time there? And so if time and change really are fundamentally linked like that, then Shoemaker's argument just goes to reinforce that fact.
Time, how does that fall into what is existence?
So in terms of existence, began to exist means that there was some point, some previous state where that thing, so there's some state where this thing exists, and that there's some previous state where this thing does not exist.
Correct.
Okay, and so between state A, which is where it doesn't exist, and state B, where it doesn't exist, that's what composes began to exist. Or if people who are, if you want to put it in a temporal mode, that in the past there was some time t that object A did not, the statement object A exists is false. All right, I'll say that again. In the past, there would be some time t where the statement object A or X does not exists is false. That statement is false.
Just define began. Cool. You still haven't defined exist. Yeah.
Right. So
do we care?
Right.
Unfortunately, aren't we running into a problem here because if time began, I mean,
what?
There would be a time before.
There's no time before.
That's right. There would be no time
So
before.
causality is something that happens within a universe. It's not something necessarily that happens to a universe.
Why not?
Because causality is temporal. beginning is a temporal word, so it can't apply to time when there was no time.
So I'll leave you with this so that we can think about it, because we're out of change. So here's your timeline, so to speak. And we talk about them in points. You know my opinion on points, so we can talk about them in intervals if you want. These are arbitrary intervals, whatever they are. But let's have some point here that at a minimum, what's true is that there's some change that occurs between this state right here and this state right here. And that's how you know time is existing. So you have this line of things that can continue to happen in this direction, or maybe they stop at some point. But if there is if you keep backing these things up, there is some state, S here, in which there is no change. Or it's some state from S to S1, that this is the first change. First change from S to S1. That means that S would be the leftmost moment in time. That would be the beginning of time. And that applies not just to physical time, it applies to metaphysical time. So remember the metaphysician is asking the question of like what all things could possibly exist. If there were things that were non-physical and they changed from state S to state S1. So let's say that there's a God who's not temporal, spatial, physical, material, or whatever else. If he's thinking like, if he's static, and then he thinks, today would be a good day to make some stuff. Okay, that would be a change from state 1, where he wasn't thinking that specific thought, to now he's thinking this specific thought. So I don't think that's how it works, but if you did, that's a change in state. It's an entirely immaterial change in a purely mental state that's not brain-based. It's just a metaphysical change. That change right there would entail time, because it went from state 1 to state 2, from S to S1. That is a non-physical, a metaphysical time change. So the question is, so physically, if physical time came into existence with the universe, the question was, is that the first moment in metaphysical time too? That's the question that I'll leave you with for this. So I think that one of the reasons I'm so passionate about time is that I believe that when you understand the nature of time, that these answers jump out at you as kind of obvious. So, but at the end of the day, I'll say this, I'll leave this gauntlet on the floor. Tell me a way that time progresses without change, or how change can progress without time, depending on whether you think time exists. But whatever you refer to it as, anything that there's a point, if you go back to the past, where there was a terminus to the change, that changes don't go back infinitely in the past, physically or metaphysically. I think that there is a finite line going pastwards where you get to a state where there was no change. To me, as a theist, that's God existing a se, not dynamic. He's not in time. He creates time by the first movement, the first thing that he creates, the first thing that he does, the first thought that he has or instantiates. And that the things that begin to exist are the things that happen after that point.
So you're saying that in like the beginning, like before time started, so to say, it was metaphysical time?
Yeah, I believe in metaphysical time, which is to say, and it's possible that metaphysical time and physical time timelines line up exactly.
Yeah,
so in my world, here's God existing a se, here's God, and that the first thing he does is say, let there be light. Okay, if that's the way that it actually worked, then physical time, metaphysical timeline, and the physical timeline are the same. Because the metaphysical timeline of the first change that ever occurred is God said something. And the first physical thing, that concurrent with him saying that, the universe bangs into existence. In this case, these are all the same. So the question is, did anything happen before the physical universe?
We got time.
We got change. Okay.
Is it possible, I know it's not what you believe, but is it possible that there was a metaphysical time where God simply instantiated other minds?
Yes.
and those minds kind of have a disagreement.
I don't think that this is what happened. I think that there are a number of changes, metaphysical changes that occur before the physical universe occurs. But yes, either one of those is possible. What's not possible is an infinite regress, either metaphysically or physically. Okay, till next change.